Epiphany of Truth TV. Today we're going to go over Bible versions. We're going to go over the Babylonian captivity, the changes to the language before and after, and Bible version. There's a lot of people who don't know who the Masorites are. There's a lot of people who don't understand the Septuagint. They don't understand Paleo-Hebrew. And the scholars purposefully mislead you on a lot of this stuff because they worship a certain language. So, the 4 Hebrew Bible scripts. Now, the oldest that we have is the Sinai inscriptions. That's from 1842 to 1446 BC, and that is in Mosaic hieroglyphic Hebrew. And then we have several Paleo-Hebrew scripts that are written, including some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of it is in Assyrian Aramaic. Some of it is in Paleo-Hebrew. So at the captivity, something changes here. We go from Paleo-Hebrew, which is a slight difference from the Sinai inscriptions. The letters can be translated right across the board, to Aramaic Hebrew, which is the square Hebrew script, which is actually the Assyrian Aramaic script. But let's look and find out why that happened. This is the Jewish Encyclopedia. Let's go down to the section that says Aramaic displaces Hebrew. Aramaic was destined to become Israel's vernacular tongue, but before this could come about, it was necessary that the national independence should be destroyed and the people removed from their own home. These events prepared the way for the great change by which the Jewish nation parted with its national tongue and replaced it, in some districts entirely by Aramaic, and others by the adoption of an Aramaicized Hebrew form. So, here we go. I mean, they're saying the entire language was changed out. Some places they did a hybrid. Most places they just completely changed it out. This is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. So we went from Paleo-Hebrew, which was one language, to an entirely new language, or at least a hybrid language. The problem, Aramaic Hebrew did not have vowels. Because of the Septuagint, because of the fall in 70 AD, the burning of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, Hebrew, the Aramaic version, became a dead language, which means that it wasn't spoken on a national level. It doesn't mean it wasn't spoken, it means it wasn't spoken on a national level. So it was very different depending on who was speaking. It was passed down from generation to generation. Well, there was a group in the 7th century called the Masorites. Now, they were in Babylon mostly, and they decided that they were going to rebuild Aramaic Hebrew, which they call Biblical Hebrew. So what they started doing is they started adding dots and dashes and vowels. They started adding the vernacular. They started rebuilding the words. They started changing the way things were. Before, it was passed down from generation to generation on how you would read these things. Now you actually have dots and lines that tell you how to read it. Biblical scholars, they like the Masoretic Texts. That's what they want to read. That's what they worship. The people that worship the Kabbalah actually believe that the Aramaic Hebrew script is this holy language that actually is the power that God pulls from. That's why they have a 42-letter name of God and a 72-letter name of God. That is the name of creation. So they believe that these particular symbols are actually the power that God used to create the world and to create the universe. So when you bring up Paleo-Hebrew, what they will do is they will superimpose this Assyrian Aramaic onto Paleo-Hebrew. Well, how does that work if it's a totally different new language? It doesn't work that way. I mean, we know from their own history, from their own books, that Aramaic displaced Hebrew. But then they say it's the same language. How could it be the same language? They say it is the Phoenician language. They say it is Paleo-Hebrew. But there's another language that came from the Phoenician language. That's ancient Greek. Matter of fact, on this first column is the Paleo-Hebrew. On the second column is ancient Greek. And you'll notice a pattern here. They're almost identical. Now all the way over here, that's classic Greek. So as you see, Paleo-Hebrew and ancient Greek are almost identical. Very, very slight differences. And if you took these two together, you can compare them to the Phoenician alphabet, and they're almost the same. Now, would this be a different language than Aramaic? Absolutely, 100%.
Now let's talk about the Masorites. Now, as they were translating the Bible and also going over the translations of the language from the 6th century to the 10th century, they had a tendency of omitting things and adding things as they saw fit.
So let's take a good example of that. Before I go through and I read from 1 Kings, and just so you know, 1 Kings in the Septuagint is also the same as 1 Samuel in the Masoretic. Let's jump up to Matthew 1. Okay, this is talking about the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And Obed begat Jesse. This is the important part here. And Jesse begat David the king. And David the king begat Solomon. Okay, so now we know Jesse, the father of David, is a direct lineage to Abraham. So this is important because the Messiah was prophesied to come from Judah.
Genesis 49:10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the people.
And we have Judah. So Jacob's son, Judah, and Judah begat Phares. Okay, so we know from this lineage that Jesus came from Judah. Now, if I were to read 1 Samuel 17, it goes in, and when Saul saw this is talking about Goliath, and this is David. He's talking to Saul. We go to verse 11, and it says, when Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And now all of a sudden it jumps to this weird conversation. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite. Ephraim is not Judah. Ephraim and Manasseh are the sons of Joseph. So Jacob with his sons, which are the tribes of Israel. Judah is one son, and Joseph is another. Ephraim is the son of Joseph. Well, this doesn't make sense. Why is David the son of an Ephrathite, whose name was Jesse? Now, we just saw Jesse was direct lineage from Judah. Then it goes through the three eldest sons, and it tells you about the eldest sons. David was the youngest. The three eldest followed Saul. David went and returned to Saul to feed his father's sheep. This is during this conversation. He decides to leave and go feed his sheep. Now they have parched corn and 10 loaves of bread, and he carries 10 cheeses to the captain of the 1,000. And now it comes back to David and Saul in the conversation. Now, why have I read all this stuff to you? Well, because if you go through the Septuagint, you go to 17, you go to 11, you'll notice that there's a jump. It goes from verse 11 to verse 32. Now, why is that? Because those verses were added by the Masorites. They were an attempt to say that David was not of Judah, and if David is not of Judah, then that means Jesus is not a direct lineage to Judah. Therefore, he can't be the Messiah. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about that they had changed. Now, the numbering system was added by the Masorites. Actually, there was two numbering systems. So if you have the Septuagint Bibles, you'll notice that they don't match up. There's a lot of things that don't match up. Now, this particular version I'm using uses the Masoretic numbering. So when you have a big, large thing that was added by the Masorites, there's a gap. So it goes, and Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, and they were dismayed and greatly terrified. And David said to Saul, let not, I pray thee, the heart of the Lord be dejected within him. So it immediately jumps into the same conversation. It doesn't go off into this weird lineage. It doesn't go off to him delivering cheese, which doesn't fit. I mean, if you read it, you can actually read all of chapter 17. In the Septuagint, it makes perfect sense. If you read it in the King James Version, which uses the Masoretic text, there's a big section that doesn't make any sense. So this is a good example on things that are different. They're different, they're wrong. The Masorites added a lot of things, they deleted things. That's more for a different video, but I just wanted to kind of go over that, because here you have in Matthew 1, the lineage, and it does not match the lineage in 1 Samuel 17. This is something that atheists like to use against us. They bring this up and they say, look, it says Jesse was a son of an Ephrathite, right? It says Jesse was an Ephrathite. And then here it says that Obed begat Jesse, and that he comes from Judas, which is Judah. The S is the Greek version. Obviously, the New Testament was written in Greek, in Koine Greek. Therefore, a male name typically has an S at the end. So the tribe of Judah right here. And we have Jesse, who begat King David. And then obviously it goes down from there, goes through the whole thing right here. and gets to, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, in whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. All right. So there we are here. Now, with that in mind, let's look at something here. So the Bible, all throughout the New Testament, says that Jesus is Lord. Now, the Tetragrammaton, which in Aramaic is YHWH, they say that's the true name of God. Well, that's translated in the Septuagint as Lord, Kyrios. So there's a lot of controversy on that. They say, well, Lord is this, Lord is that. They'll say that, well, Lord is what Baal means, but if you look up the word Baal, it means husband, it means Lord, it means owner, it means master. It was a blanket word, and a foreign god, a bad guy, used that same word as his name. This guy decided that he was God in the flesh, and he named himself Shoes. That doesn't make shoes evil. Shoes is just a word. Okay, so using the word Lord wasn't a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. So they say Jesus is Lord. So let's go over this now. So we have this right here is the ancient Greek and the Paleo-Hebrew iota. Now this is important. Let's look into something here real quick. Now, there were two languages that spawned off of ancient Greek, Koine Greek and Latin. They're very, very, very similar. So the old rules of Latin are extremely close to the ancient Greek. So you'll constantly see online that the letter J is only 500 years old, and that's a trick. It's the old country swap. The letter J, that is an English letter, is only 500 years old. The sound J is in multiple languages for a very long time. Okay, so here is classical Latin. It says the J sound, technically called the consonantal I, appears in the beginning of the words before a vowel, or in the middle of the words between two vowels. So here we have the letter J, because this is an epsilon next. We have J, we have E. This is called the Su. Let me pop that up here for you. Su, which is an S and a U, and then an E. So if I were to read the Tetragrammaton, what people say in Aramaic is YHWH. What's translated to Lord in the Koine Greek, if I were to read this in Paleo-Hebrew, it would be Jisu. And if you transferred this to Koine Greek, and males have an S after their name, this would spell Jesus. Jesus truly is Lord. Lord from the Old Testament used to say Jesus in Paleo-Hebrew. So let's go over kind of a timeline here. The Masorites from the 600s to the 1000s reformed Hebrew, in particular Aramaic Hebrew. The Aramaic Hebrew was released in what's called the Leningrad Codex. The Leningrad Codex was released in 1008 AD. So a lot of the churches, a lot of groups, they started using those Masoretic texts. Now, the Leningrad Codex itself was lost until the end of the 1800s. But prior to that, pieces of it was around, and a lot of people used it. Erasmus decided he was going to do a Greek version of the Bible that was newer. Erasmus wrote the Textus Receptus. The Textus Receptus is what the King James Version is based on. Now, he prepared new Latin and Greek editions. There were certain things that he didn't know. There were certain things that he was trying to speed through. In his original manuscripts, there's all sorts of notes. This shouldn't belong here, but and I don't want to argue with it. And this right here, I wasn't sure what this was. So there was a lot of different cues and points. A good example of that is the word Lucifer. The word Lucifer in Latin means morning star or illuminated one. Lucifer and Luciferum. It's not a name. The Latin word Lucifer is what's used as a title for an angel. And it's used in the Jerome's Vulgate all over the New Testament. There's several spots where it says either Lucifer or Luciferum. So when you hit the famous line there,
1812, King James Version. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Isaiah 14:12, the New Revised Standard Version. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How are you cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low?
For some reason, he left the Latin word in there. So he was making a Greek version and left a Latin word. Well, when the King James writers went in, they didn't know how to speak Latin. They saw this word, assumed it was a name because they'd never seen it before, capitalized it. And that's why we have the word Lucifer written in there. In Revelation, it goes through all sorts of titles and names for Satan. And in that, it doesn't say Lucifer.
Revelation 22. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years.
Matter of fact, Jesus is called the bright and shining star, or the bright and morning star, depending on the translation, Luciferum. That's why that there are certain groups that are saying, well, Jesus is actually Lucifer. Well, yeah, if you knew the actual meaning of Lucifer. It's not a name. It just means an angel. How far have thou fallen, O Lucifer? It's calling him an angel, saying that he is an angel that fell. Now that is referring to the king of Babylon, which is also Satan. So the term Lucifer, yes, Satan, we know Satan was an angel. So yes, Satan is Lucifer. Gabriel is Lucifer. All of the angels are Lucifer. And Jesus is the head of the angels, so therefore he is the bright Lucifer. So that's a good example. One of the best things about Erasmus is that he got into a pretty big debate with Martin Luther about predestination. His debate with Martin Luther led to kind of a book writing contest between the two, back and forth. Erasmus won. But the reason he won is because he used several quotes from the book Baruch. There's a thing called the Deuterocanonical books. It's Deutero being second, and canonical, which means second canon. So it's the second canon. So originally you have the Old Testament, the second canon, and then eventually you have the New Testament. In 325 at the Council of Nicaea, they kept the same thing. When Martin Luther lost the debate, he said, well, obviously those middle books can't be right. They preach that you have free will. He didn't believe you had free will. He believed that you were predestined, that God picks you. That'll sound familiar to you because 100 years later you had John Calvin, who took Luther's view and took it to a whole new level. They started calling the Deuterocanonical books the Apocrypha. And a lot of the Calvinists, a lot of the Lutheran-style people started rejecting the various books of the Deuterocanonical books. Eventually, they started dropping it. Many of the groups that were in America dropped it. It wasn't officially removed from the King James Bible until the 1800s. In the late 1800s, like 1885 or something like that. Very end of the 1800s is when the Apocrypha was actually removed. So I just saw a thing on Facebook that said that the Catholic Church removed these books. No, the Catholic Church still has those books in there. The Greek Orthodox Bibles still have it there. It was the Protestant movement that got rid of it. Compliments of Martin Luther. So there is kind of a rough history of the Bible, why I tend to follow the Septuagint over the Masoretic Text by far. I like the Greek Orthodox Old Testaments. I like the New King James because the New King James is made from a newer version of Erasmus's Textus Receptus, in which he was actually able to go through and nitpick on himself and remove some of the wordage that he put in that was extra and fix a few things that he had gotten wrong. You don't have to have a very specific type of Bible. You do have to know what things mean. I still think that the King James is good. I quote it all the time. But you have to be careful because there are things that are changed. That section in 1 Samuel is a prime example on why you have to be careful. There's also ages that are adjusted. So there's our first video. I thank everybody for listening, and I hope you guys were entertained. You all have a great day. God bless.